What if the man sworn to protect your city hid the one love that made him human? What would you do if the secret love you cherished for years suddenly became front-page news? Could one moment of truth transform a city's most trusted leader into its ultimate beacon of hope and love? Jackson Thompson stood at the podium in the Evergreen Police Department briefing room, his broad shoulders squared under the crisp blue uniform that had defined his life for 20 years. At 42, he was the youngest chief the Pacific Northwest city had ever seen, a man whose quick decisions during the floods of 2023 had saved dozens of lives and earned him the key to the city twice. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the faces of his officers, who looked up at him with the same respect they always had. Jackson cleared his throat, his voice steady, as he outlined the new community outreach program aimed at bridging gaps between law enforcement and local families. Yet inside his chest something entirely different churned. Across town in a quiet apartment, Levi Harper was probably pouring coffee into two mismatched mugs the way he always did on quiet mornings before Jackson slipped out the back door to avoid curious neighbors. 5 years together, and still they lived like shadows, careful never to be seen holding hands in public, never to let a glance linger too long at department barbecues. Levi, a 35-year-old high school counselor with kind hazel eyes and a laugh that could soften the hardest edges, had become Jackson's anchor, the only person who knew the man beneath the badge. That afternoon the world shifted without warning. Jackson was reviewing case files when his phone buzzed with an alert from the local news app. The headline screamed in bold letters, "Exclusive photos surface, police chief Thompson caught in romantic embrace with another man." Attached was a grainy but unmistakable image taken through a telephoto lens at a secluded cabin up in the Cascades 2 weekends ago. Jackson and Levi laughing by the fire, their foreheads touching in a moment meant only for them. His stomach dropped. The secret he had guarded since college, the truth he had buried under layers of duty and fear, was now public property. Reporters swarmed the station steps within the hour, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. Jackson stepped outside, his face calm but his pulse racing. He had prepared speeches for bank robberies, for natural disasters, but nothing for this. A young journalist shouted, "Chief Thompson, are you gay? And if so, how does this affect your ability to lead?" The question hung in the crisp autumn air like a challenge. Jackson felt the eyes of his officers behind him, some wide with shock, others narrowed in judgment. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words stuck. For the first time in his career, the protector needed protecting, and he had no idea where to begin. Back in the apartment, Levi paced the living room, his phone lighting up with missed calls from friends and family. He had warned Jackson that their weekend getaway felt risky, but love had made them careless. Now the exposure threatened everything: Jackson's career, their quiet life, the fragile peace they had built. Levi stopped at the window, staring at the distant mountains where their secret had been born. He whispered to the empty room, "We always knew this day might come, but I never thought it would feel like the ground opening beneath us." By evening, the city council chamber filled with emergency session chatter. Mayor Elena Rivera, a no-nonsense woman who had backed Jackson's promotion, called for calm, but the damage was spreading fast. Social media exploded with opinions, some supportive, some vicious. Jackson sat alone in his office, the badge on his desk suddenly heavier than ever. He thought of his late father, a strict Marine who had taught him that real men never showed weakness. He thought of his younger sister Sarah, who still believed he was the straight widower raising a fictional past to hide the truth. Most of all, he thought of Levi waiting at home, probably wondering if their love was about to cost Jackson everything he had worked for. The first crack in the armor had appeared, and Jackson knew there was no sealing it again. The drive home that night felt endless. Jackson pulled into the garage of their shared townhouse, the one they had bought under Levi's name to keep appearances. Levi met him at the door, his arms wrapping around Jackson without a word. They stood there in the hallway, the weight of the day pressing down, until Jackson finally spoke, his voice rough. "I don't know if I can fix this, Levi. The department, the city, everything I built is cracking, and I don't know who I am without it." Levi pulled back just enough to look him in the eyes. "Then maybe it's time you find out who you are with it." "I'm not going anywhere, Jackson. Not unless you ask me to." That night they talked until the early hours, mapping out possibilities and fears. Jackson admitted the constant vigilance had exhausted him the way he scanned every room for threats to their secret more than for actual criminals. Levi shared his own quiet struggles at school, where students sometimes asked why he never brought a girlfriend to events. Their conversation wove through memories of stolen weekends, hidden notes, and the first time they had admitted their feelings during a charity 5K run 3 years earlier. By dawn, Jackson felt a strange flicker of something new, not quite hope, but a willingness to stop running. The exposure had ripped open the door he had nailed shut for decades, and now the light was pouring in whether he was ready or not. The next morning, the department buzzed with tension. Officer Ramirez, his longtime partner on patrols, avoided eye contact while Captain Hayes, the second in command, cleared his throat awkwardly during roll call. Jackson addressed the team head on his words measured. "I won't hide anymore. My personal life is exactly that, personal, but I am the same chief who has stood with you through every crisis. If you have questions, talk to me directly. If you can't handle it, I understand, but I won't let it affect the job we do for this city." Some officers nodded, others shifted uncomfortably, but no one walked out. It was a small victory, yet it steadied Jackson enough to face the press conference scheduled for noon. Levi drove him there in silence, his hand resting on Jackson's knee for the first time in public. As they approached City Hall, the crowd outside was larger than expected, a mix of supporters waving rainbow flags and protesters holding signs that stung like accusations. Jackson stepped onto the platform, Levi standing just behind him, out of camera range, but close enough to remind him he was not alone. The questions came fast and sharp, but Jackson answered with a honesty he had never allowed himself before. "Yes, I am gay. Yes, I love a man named Levi Harper who has stood by me through every silent year. And no, that does not change my commitment to serve Evergreen with everything I have." The words left his mouth and the world did not end. Cameras clicked, reporters scribbled, and somewhere in the crowd a cheer broke out. Jackson felt the knot in his chest loosen just a fraction. The exposure had come like a storm, but in its wake, he sensed the first hints of sunlight. Little did he know the real battle was only beginning, and the city that had once revered him was about to decide whether to tear him down or lift him higher than ever before. The days after the press conference blurred into a whirlwind of interviews and internal meetings. Jackson arrived at the station each morning expecting whispers or outright hostility, yet what he found was a surprising undercurrent of support. Officer Ramirez pulled him aside in the locker room, his voice low. "Chief, I got your back. My brother's gay, and I saw how hard he fought to be himself. You're still the guy who pulled me out of that car wreck last year." The simple words landed like a lifeline. Jackson clapped him on the shoulder, grateful for the first crack of acceptance from within his own ranks. At home, Levi cooked dinner pasta with fresh basil, the way Jackson liked it, trying to keep things normal amid the chaos. They ate at the kitchen island, talking through the media frenzy. Levi admitted the calls from his school principal had been tense but supportive, the students surprisingly curious rather than cruel. One kid asked, "If you're going to march in the Pride Parade now?" Levi said with a small smile. Jackson laughed, despite himself, the sound rusty from disuse. For the first time they discussed the future, openly planning a real date at the Italian restaurant downtown instead of takeout in the garage. The exposure had stripped away the secrecy, and in its place grew a tentative freedom. Yet not everything was smooth. Jackson's sister Sarah arrived unannounced from Portland, her face tight with confusion. She hugged him fiercely, then pulled back, her eyes searching. "All these years, Jack, you let me believe you were still mourning your college girlfriend. Why didn't you trust me?" The question cut deep. Jackson explained the fear, the pressure from their father's expectations, the way being chief had demanded an image of unbreakable strength. Sarah listened, tears forming, then nodded slowly. "I love you no matter what. Just don't shut me out again." Her acceptance eased one weight, but another loomed larger. The department's internal review board had scheduled a hearing to address concerns about his leadership. Captain Hayes sat across from Jackson in the conference room, his expression unreadable. "Some of the older guys are grumbling about optics, Chief. They say the media circus distracts from real police work." Jackson met his gaze steady. "Then let's prove them wrong. Double the patrols in the South District like we planned. Show the city we're stronger, not weaker." Hayes leaned back, a reluctant smile forming. "You're not making this easy, but damn if you don't still have that fire." The meeting ended without formal reprimand, yet Jackson knew the undercurrents of doubt remained. Levi sensed the tension when Jackson returned home that evening. They sat on the back porch watching the sunset over the mountains, Levi's hand resting lightly on Jackson's. "You're carrying the whole department on your shoulders again," Levi said softly. "But you don't have to. Let me carry some of it." Jackson turned to him, the vulnerability he had hidden for so long rising to the surface. "I spent years thinking love would make me weak. Now I see it might be the only thing keeping me standing." They talked deep into the night about Levi's own journey coming out in college, the family who had struggled then embraced him. Jackson listened, realizing how much he had missed by staying silent. The following week brought an unexpected ally. Mayor Rivera invited Jackson and Levi to a private dinner at her residence, the table set with simple elegance. She poured wine and got straight to the point. "The city is watching, Jackson. Some see scandal, others see courage. I see an opportunity." She outlined plans for a community forum on inclusivity in law enforcement. Jackson hesitated, then agreed, the idea sparking a new resolve. Levi added thoughtful suggestions, his counselor's instincts shining through. By dessert, the three of them were laughing, the weight of the week lifting slightly. Back at the station the next day, Jackson led a training session on de-escalation techniques, his voice confident. Officers participated fully, the earlier awkwardness fading. Even the department's most vocal skeptic, Sergeant Klein, muttered approval after a successful drill. Jackson felt the shift, a slow gathering of momentum. Yet late that night, a text from an anonymous number arrived. "Your kind doesn't belong in uniform. Watch your back." The threat chilled him, but instead of hiding, Jackson forwarded it to Internal Affairs and told Levi immediately. "No more secrets," he said firmly. Levi nodded, pulling him into an embrace that spoke volumes. Sarah called the next morning, offering to fly back for support. Jackson accepted, grateful for the family bridge he had almost burned. Levi suggested they all meet for brunch, the idea both terrifying and liberating. As Jackson prepared for the day, he caught his reflection in the mirror. The man staring back looked different, somehow lighter. The exposure had forced him to confront the parts of himself he had denied, but in doing so it revealed strengths he never knew he possessed. The city was still deciding his fate, yet Jackson was beginning to decide his own. The road ahead remained uncertain, but for the first time he walked it without looking over his shoulder. The Internal Affairs investigation dragged on for weeks, turning Jackson's once predictable routine into a minefield of questions and paperwork. He spent hours reviewing body cam footage and incident reports, proving his decisions remained sound despite the personal storm. Levi waited up each night, listening patiently as Jackson vented the frustration of defending his competence when his character was on trial. "They keep asking if my judgment is compromised," Jackson said one evening, his voice heavy. Levi replied gently, "Your judgment brought us here together. That has to count for something." At the station, tensions peaked when Sergeant Klein finally confronted Jackson in the parking lot, his face flushed. "I served under your father, Chief. He wouldn't have stood for this." The words landed like a slap. Jackson straightened, refusing to back down. "My father taught me duty, Klein. Protecting people includes protecting their right to live honestly. If that's a problem, you're free to request transfer." Klein stormed off, but the exchange spread through the ranks, dividing opinions further. Some officers rallied around Jackson, others distanced themselves, creating an invisible fracture in the department. Levi's school faced its own ripple effects. A parent complained about his lifestyle influencing students, prompting a meeting with the principal. Levi handled it with grace, sharing stories of students who had confided in him about their own identities. The principal ultimately backed him, but the incident left Levi drained. That weekend, Jackson and Levi escaped to the same cabin where the photos had been taken, this time openly booking it under both names. They hiked the trails, talked about everything and nothing, the fresh air clearing their heads. Jackson admitted the betrayal by Klein had stung more than the media frenzy. "I thought we were a team," he said. Levi squeezed his hand. "Some teams change. Others break. We're building something new." Monday brought a breakthrough. The mayor announced the community forum for the following month, framing it as a celebration of diversity in public service. Jackson was asked to speak alongside community leaders. The invitation felt like a double-edged sword, validation mixed with pressure. Levi helped him draft notes encouraging honesty over polish. Tell them what it felt like to hide, he urged. Jackson practiced in front of the mirror, his voice gaining strength with each rehearsal. Meanwhile, Sarah arrived for the brunch she had promised, bringing stories from her own life that mirrored Jackson's struggles. Over pancakes, she confessed her own fears about being judged as a single mother. The conversation flowed easily, laughter replacing earlier awkwardness. Levi fit seamlessly, sharing jokes that had Sarah grinning. For Jackson, it was the first time all pieces of his world felt connected rather than compartmentalized. The hearing before the review board finally convened. Jackson presented his case with data on crime reduction rates and community feedback letters. Captain Hayes testified in support, surprising even Jackson. "He's the best leader we've had," Hayes stated simply. The board deliberated for 3 hours, then delivered their verdict: no formal discipline, only a recommendation for sensitivity training, which Jackson accepted without protest. Relief washed over him, but he knew the real test lay ahead at the forum. That evening, Klein approached Jackson again, this time alone in the break room. "I was wrong, Chief. My son came out last year and I reacted the same way I did with you. I'm sorry." The apology hung between them, raw and unexpected. Jackson extended his hand. "Apology accepted. Let's move forward." The moment marked another small victory in the larger battle. Levi celebrated the news with a quiet dinner at home, toasting to progress. As the forum date neared, Jackson felt the weight of expectation growing. He visited the high school where Levi worked, speaking informally to students about courage and honesty. Their questions were blunt but genuine, one teenager asking, "Did you ever think you'd lose everything?" Jackson answered truthfully, "Every day, until I realized keeping the secret was what I was losing." The interaction energized him, reminding him why he had chosen law enforcement in the first place: to protect the vulnerable, including his younger self. The night before the forum, Jackson and Levi lay awake talking through scenarios. Levi shared his own coming-out story, the relief that had followed the fear. Jackson listened, absorbing the lessons. "You've given me the strength to do this," he told Levi. The words felt true and freeing. Outside, the city slept, unaware that the man they had once revered for his badge was about to redefine what heroism meant in Evergreen. The exposure had tested them both, but together they were turning the page toward something brighter. The community forum filled the auditorium at City Hall to capacity, rainbow banners draped alongside American flags, creating a visual harmony Jackson had never imagined possible in his conservative hometown roots. He stood backstage, heart pounding, Levi beside him, offering a steadying hand on his shoulder. "You've got this," Levi whispered. When the mayor introduced him, the applause surprised Jackson more than the occasional boos from the back rows. He stepped to the podium, microphone in hand, and began speaking from the heart. "I joined the force because I believed in protecting people," he said, his voice clear. "For years, I protected everyone except myself. Hiding who I am cost me sleep, cost me honesty, and nearly cost me the man I love." He gestured toward Levi, who had joined him on stage, the gesture deliberate and public. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by more applause. Jackson continued, sharing stories of officers he had mentored, of families he had helped, without ever revealing his own truth. The audience leaned in, some wiping tears, others nodding in recognition. After his speech, community members approached with handshakes and hugs. A retired teacher shared her son's struggle with acceptance. A young officer confessed his own hidden identity, inspired now to come forward. Jackson felt the energy shift, the forum transforming from potential confrontation to collective healing. Levi fielded questions too, his calm demeanor winning over skeptics. Sarah watched from the front row, pride shining in her eyes. The local newspaper ran the story on the front page, the headline reading, "Chief Thompson's Courage Unites Evergreen." Social media amplified the message, turning Jackson into an overnight symbol. Invitations poured in from neighboring cities for speaking engagements. Jackson accepted a few, carefully balancing them with his duties at the station. Levi joined him on some trips, their relationship now openly acknowledged and celebrated. Back at the department, the atmosphere had warmed considerably. Officers began including Levi in group events, barbecues, and holiday parties. Klein even brought his son to one gathering, the young man thanking Jackson for paving the way. The internal fractures mended slowly but surely, teamwork improving as personal barriers fell. Jackson led a new initiative pairing officers with LGBTQ youth mentors, the program gaining statewide attention. Challenges persisted, of course. An anonymous complaint to the State Oversight Board questioned Jackson's focus, but the investigation cleared him swiftly, citing improved community relations statistics. Levi faced occasional stares at school events, but his students rallied around him, forming a support club that surprised everyone. Together, Jackson and Levi navigated the spotlight, learning to set boundaries while embracing the platform they had been given. One evening after a long day, they sat on their porch, Levi reading a book, Jackson sketching ideas for the next outreach event. "Remember when we thought this would destroy us?" Levi asked softly. Jackson smiled, setting his notebook aside. "Now it feels like it rebuilt us stronger." They watched the stars emerge, the same mountains that once hid their secret now standing witness to their openness. Sarah called later that week, announcing her plan to move closer to help with the growing public demands on Jackson. The family bond strengthened, further proof that truth had ripple effects far beyond the individual. Jackson reflected on the journey from the initial exposure to this moment of quiet contentment. The man who had once feared losing everything had gained a deeper sense of purpose, a true partnership, and a city that saw him not as a scandal but as a leader worth following. The mayor scheduled a special recognition ceremony for the following month, honoring Jackson as Evergreen's symbol of unity. Jackson accepted the news with humility, asking Levi to stand with him on stage. Levi agreed, the decision sealing their commitment in the most public way yet. As preparations began, Jackson realized the exposure had been the catalyst, not the catastrophe. It had forced growth, demanded honesty, and ultimately delivered a version of himself he could finally be proud to lead with. The city was ready to celebrate, and Jackson was ready to let them. Preparations for the recognition ceremony consumed the weeks leading up to it, turning City Hall into a hub of activity, with volunteers hanging banners and local businesses donating food for the reception. Jackson reviewed his speech nightly, refining each line to honor the officers who had stood by him, the community that had rallied, and Levi, whose love had anchored everything. Levi helped with edits, his insight sharpening the message from personal confession to universal call for empathy. "Make them feel what you felt," he advised gently. Jackson nodded, grateful for the partnership that had evolved from secret to shared strength. At the station, the team threw an informal celebration, complete with a cake decorated with both the police shield and a small rainbow flag. Officers shared stories of how Jackson's leadership had impacted their lives, Ramirez recounting the night Jackson had talked him through a personal crisis years before. The room filled with laughter and toasts, the earlier divisions now distant memories. Klein approached Jackson privately, offering a genuine handshake. "You've changed the department for the better, Chief. Proud to serve under you." The words closed a chapter Jackson had feared would remain open forever. Levi's school organized a student assembly where Jackson spoke briefly, the teenagers responding with questions that ranged from funny to profound. One asked about balancing career and love. Jackson's answer drawing applause. "You don't balance them," he said. "You let them support each other." Levi watched from the side, smiling, the pride in his eyes unmistakable. After the event, they walked the school grounds hand in hand, no longer caring who saw. Sarah arrived early for the ceremony, helping with logistics, her presence a steady comfort. She and Levi bonded over shared stories of supporting Jackson through the toughest moments, the trio forming a tight support circle. Jackson felt the family he had once kept at arm's length now fully integrated into his life, the healing profound. The day of the ceremony dawned bright and clear. Jackson dressed in his formal uniform, Levi in a tailored suit that complemented him perfectly. They drove to City Hall together, the streets lined with well-wishers waving signs of support. Inside, the auditorium overflowed with residents, officials, and media. The mayor took the stage first, praising Jackson's service, then called him forward. Jackson's speech flowed naturally, detailing the fear of exposure, the support that surprised him, and the growth that followed. He turned to Levi, extending a hand. "This honor belongs to both of us. Levi showed me that true strength comes from living openly." The audience rose in a standing ovation, the moment captured by flashing cameras. Jackson pinned a special unity badge on Levi's lapel, the gesture symbolizing their shared journey. Afterward, the reception buzzed with congratulations, handshakes, and photos. Jackson moved through the crowd, humbled by the outpouring. A young man approached, identifying himself as a new recruit inspired by Jackson's story to join the force. The interaction reinforced Jackson's sense of purpose, the exposure now a legacy rather than a liability. Levi pulled Jackson aside during a quiet moment, their foreheads touching just as they had in that fateful photo. "We made it," Levi whispered. Jackson smiled, the weight of years finally lifted. "We did more than that. We built something lasting." The evening ended with fireworks over the city skyline, Jackson and Levi watching from a private balcony, Sarah nearby. The ceremony had not only honored Jackson, it had solidified his place as a symbol, the city embracing the very truth it had once feared. Jackson reflected on the path from hidden love to public icon, the growth hard-won but deeply rewarding. The man who had once questioned his place now stood firmly in it, surrounded by love and respect. The future stretched ahead, open and honest, the exposure transformed into the beginning of a new chapter for them all. Months after the ceremony, life in Evergreen settled into a new rhythm, one where Jackson's identity was simply part of the fabric rather than a headline. He continued leading the department with the same dedication, implementing programs that paired law enforcement with mental health services and diversity training. Officers now approached him, openly sharing their own stories, the department stronger for the openness he had modeled. Levi thrived at school, his role expanded to include counseling for LGBTQ youth, the impact rippling through families who once stayed silent. Jackson and Levi purchased a house together in a quiet neighborhood, the move symbolizing permanence. They hosted barbecues, inviting colleagues, family, and neighbors, the gatherings filled with laughter and easy conversation. Sarah visited, often her children warming to their uncle and his partner, the family circle complete. Jackson no longer scanned rooms for judgment, instead focusing on connection, the freedom exhilarating. One crisp autumn day, Jackson received a call from the state governor inviting him to speak at a national conference on leadership and inclusion. He accepted, with Levi by his side, their joint presentation drawing standing ovations. The exposure that had once threatened everything now opened doors they had never imagined. Back home, Jackson stood on the porch watching Levi tend the garden, the simple domestic scene a far cry from their hidden past. He thought of the 3 questions that had haunted him the night of the leak and smiled. The man sworn to protect had learned to protect himself first. The secret love had become public strength. And the revelation had indeed rebuilt everything stronger. The city continued to honor him in small ways, a scholarship named after him for aspiring officers, a mural downtown depicting unity in law enforcement. Jackson accepted each recognition with humility, crediting Levi and the community that had chosen compassion over condemnation. In quiet moments, Jackson reflected on the journey, the internal storms, the external battles, and the growth that emerged. He had faced betrayal, misunderstanding, and fear, yet emerged with deeper relationships, clearer purpose, and a love that had weathered the worst. Levi joined him one evening, handing him a cup of coffee, their ritual unchanged. "Proud of you, Chief," Levi said with a grin. Jackson pulled him close, the embrace easy and open. "Proud of us." The story of the police chief exposed as gay had become legend in Evergreen, a tale of courage that inspired change. Jackson and Levi lived it every day, proving that truth, when embraced, could transform not only a life but an entire city. The symbol stood tall not because of perfection but because of honesty, the kind that set everyone free. As winter approached, Jackson walked the streets of his city, badge shining, head held high. The man who had hidden for decades now led with his whole heart, the unexpected honor a testament to the power of living authentically. Evergreen had chosen to uplift him, and in doing so had lifted itself. The journey complete, Jackson looked forward to whatever came next, knowing he and Levi would face it together. In the end, the story reminds us that hiding who we are may feel safe, but living truthfully brings real freedom. Jackson's journey shows courage isn't the absence of fear, it's moving forward anyway, supported by love and community. The lesson is simple yet profound. When we choose honesty over secrecy, we don't lose respect, we earn a deeper kind, one that honors every part of us. Let this encourage anyone wrestling with their own truth. Your city, your family, your world might just be waiting to celebrate the real you.